All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our DEI panel, Theater for Social Change. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome the entire panel today, beginning with our moderator, Ricky Howie.
Hello, everyone. I am so glad that you are here. And before we get started, I just want to introduce the amazing panel of individuals that will be talking with me today about Theater for Social Change and all the important things that go along with that. And I want to start with Donatella Galella, who teaches at the University of California, Riverside. She has a book, America in the Round, Capital, Race, and Nation at Washington, D.C.'s Arena Stage, is a critical history of the first professional theater in the U.S. Capitol. She's also been cited in the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, and NPR, among other venues, for her work on race, casting, and musical theater. She's currently researching how yellowface persists in contemporary theater and how Asian American artists have worked against racism. So thank you and welcome, Donatella. And we also have next with us Dr. Nadka Bianchini, is a director, theater scholar, and educator with nearly 20 years of teaching experience. She has taught a wide array of courses in theater history, directing, and dramatic literature. And as a scholar, she's published 2 books, as well as numerous chapters, articles, and reviews. Dr. Bianchini is a resident artist and board member with Iron Crow Theater, which is Baltimore's award-winning professional queer theater. And she has more than 30 directing credits on her regional and educational level. So again, Dr. Bianchini, thank you so much. Next, we have Jorge Arroyo. Has been a freelance lighting designer for over 20 years and has worked in a variety of disciplines ranging from theater, dance, corporate events, concerts, to television, and more. His work has been seen in multiple venues, Apollo Theater, Carnegie Hall, and the Public Theater, among others. And also, he has created designs for over 50 shows in both the New Jersey Performing Arts Center and Jazz at Lincoln Center. He is the co-author of the last 3 versions of the Light-Right Manual and Tutorial, the industry standard software for tracking lighting paperwork. And our next panelist, Hugh Fletcher. He's a theater director at Dr. Roland Patterson Middle School in New York, and he is the junior thespian troupe director of Troupe 89019. He's been teaching since 2002 and founded the theater department in 2008. He's also a playwright, actor, singer, and director, and he has had 2 plays produced professionally and has worked as an acting teacher and coach at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute in New York. And I am Ricky Howie, who is from the DMV area, Washington, D.C., and I work with several theater companies as performer, director, choreographer, and most recently teaching artist and diversity consultant and liaison. Pretty much I started my own company and decided that I was going to bring diversity conversations and accessible theatrical industry training to the DMV and the theatrical community at large across the country. So with that, I welcome everyone to our chat. And I'm just going to open it up with a question. So, and anyone on the panel, feel free to unmute and respond as you see fit. But what is your take on theater for social justice? And how have you been incorporating this into your practice? Anyone? Jorge, I'm gonna call on you first because you're smiling the most.
I should have done that. Well, much of the past year, the pandemic, a lot of my focus has been on changing really the hiring practices of the American theater as with regards to designers particularly. I think there's always a lot of focus on performers, and that work needs to continue. It has been going for a while, but no one was talking about designers. And so I've been a part of a couple of organizations that have been striving for greater representation behind the scenes. One is La Gente, the Latinx Theater Design Network. And are designers, technicians, and managers who are we've come together to work to really be present. And the other one is Design Action, which is a collective of BIPOC designers all across the country that are also doing the same work. So that's really where my focus has been. So much of it is just gaining presence within our profession, it's really unfortunate. There have been 6 productions of West Side Story on Broadway, and none of them have ever been designed by a Latinx artist. So that doesn't sound right to me. I could go down that we have all sorts of stats that really kind of make your blood boil. Because it shouldn't be that way, because there's some amazing artists. There's some designers that I've come across within our ranks that if I was directing a show, I would happily call any one of them because they're so talented. So we're there, but we just need to change some habits.
You need that visibility and equity in sight and forethought from others to actually not only recognize your talent, but see it for what it is, and then engage in using that talent. And that is
exactly right.
It's definitely the cornerstone of social change and the cornerstone of diversity. It's being seen, heard, and understood and utilized, not just them over there. So
that's right.
Great, welcome. Anyone else want to respond to that question? You.
So to me, Theater for Social Justice is theater that's current, that's relevant, and it's important to the demographic that that is both performing, but also that is attending. And for me personally, it's about getting the youth engaged and involved with different types of literature that are not the typical, not what you would necessarily see in every theater program across the country, but those artists that may be a little bit neglected, the ones that voices you don't necessarily hear, or even the ones that you are accustomed to, reframing that in a way that's relevant and speaks to my community and my group of performers.
Okay. And Nadka, any feedback on this question?
Yeah. For me, theater is such a powerful tool for social justice because it, I think more than any other art form, it really flexes your empathy muscle. This has actually been measured by social scientists, that if you bring students to live performance, tested against a control group of students who just read the play in class, that there's a dramatic difference in their experience and their empathy and their understanding of the story and the characters if they saw the live performance. And so I try to expose my students to as much live performance as possible, and also sort of what Hugh was saying, responding to what's happening right now. I think even prior to the racial pandemic, with the national and international attention on the murder of George Floyd last year, but even prior to that, we saw a number of Black playwrights in the US really responding to systemic racism through their plays. And so I try to bring that into the classroom as much as possible. And I would, for educators watching today, I would encourage them to seek this work out. Fairview, the Pulitzer Prize winning play Fairview by Jackie Sibley's Jury, really boundary shattering work. And that's just the first on a long list of plays that have been published in the last 5 years and performed that are responding to where we are right now in the US as we wrestle with systemic racism.
And Donatella, any insight?
Yeah, I want to build on what Jorge was suggesting about redistributing resources and opportunities to those who haven't had them. And so for me, Theater for Social Justice has a very specific intention about trying to mitigate these systemic inequalities. And so for me, with my own educational practice, that might show up in how I point out to my students how these inequalities and biases have shaped our already pre-existing knowledge. So for instance, in theater history, I'll ask, what do you think is the earliest theater that we have on the historical record? And most students will say ancient Egypt. And I'll ask them why, because the actual answer is they'll say ancient Greece, but it's actually ancient Egypt. And so we'll talk about the biases that led to that gap in knowledge. And we might also talk about how that first recorded play is called by historians the Abydos Passion Play, but then why are we calling it using this terminology that makes it legible, that makes it seen through a Western lens, calling it a passion play in reference to Christ when it's like a totally different culture. So we talk about how those words really have meaning and are laden with different power dynamics. And then I'll just add that when I was hired at the University of California, Riverside, it was specifically to invent a new course on Asian American theater, in part because of the very large 1/3 of the student population being Asian Americans. So just creating that course and having the final assignment be that the students create their own syllabi at the end, it teaches them how to then be the teachers and pass on that knowledge. So those are just some examples. The last one I just want to add is sometimes I just think about what are the privileges I have and what can I do to boost other students and their voices and their artwork. So in the last time I taught theater history this spring, I had a student write her own original play inspired by a play that we had read in class, which was A Sunday Morning in the South by Georgia Douglas Johnson, which is a lynching play by this African-American woman from 100 years ago to deal with the epidemic of lynchings of African Americans at that time. And so my student wrote a play inspired by that about contemporary increases in explicitly anti-Asian violence. And then when she wrote that, I just thought, why don't we just stage this on Zoom and gather the students that we have available? And it was so impactful for the playwright to see that, and especially for those Asian American students who were cast who had never played Filipino American characters before, though that's how they identify. And for many of them, this was the most powerful experience they've had performing at our university.
Wow, that's amazing. And based on actually everything that all of you have said, just the tip of the iceberg, since I'm new to putting my, I guess you could say, activist toe into things, though I've always been very vocal with everything else that I do in theater, calling things out when they need to. One of the things that I always say about theater, and especially with social change, if you think back to, 1920s, 1930s, people went to the theater in order to get messages about what was going on in the world, what was going on in the communities. It was, I always kind of toy with, I said, it was better than a newspaper because you got to see it performed on stage. So it was more engaging that way. And I have conversations with friends in different theater groups about some of those shows that came out from that period that, of course, we're not doing those shows anymore. So you have like 1,000 Cheer and things like that, which were all political plays back in the day that were delivering a message. But that was a form of social change. And I like discussing those plays and putting a new kind of eyesight on it, a new thought process in terms of, if we were to do this today, how can we take this with the demographic that we have in the room or in the community and express this message in today's terms? So there are little things that I do on the community theater level to get organizations and companies to start thinking about things differently, and not only taking new and current works, but really, as I call it in one of my segments, reclaiming the theatrical canon from some of the old works and having those discussions and revisiting those topics and opening it up and having the different communities represented in those discussions, because I learned so much more and uncover even the biases that I have, and even recognizing, and people find this odd, the privileges that I have, because people are like, well, you can't have privileges because you're African American. I was like, no, I have privileges. It's very different. My privileges are going to be different from yours, but it's recognizing what those are and being able to discuss them. I like discussing them theatrically because it allows you to slip into another character and kind of divulge that information. But yeah, y'all all gave me some really good ideas. I'm sitting over here feverishly taking notes. Another question that came in was, considering the current climate that we are all sitting in, what are some aspirations you have for theater to bring about change? And some of you have already talked about that somewhat, but if you had to pick one or two aspirations, what would that be for theater to bring about change based on the current climate? Don't smile, Jorge. I'll call on you first. I'm gonna go Hugh this time.
So, theater is the perfect venue for people to come together and exchange ideas in a safe space, in a space where dialogue can take place, not only on the production side or the rehearsal side, but you can also have that exchange during performance and after performance. And so, because you have all of these people from various backgrounds who come to engage in this space, you have a greater opportunity to not only convey messages, but also receive. And so, that's always how it's been. Shakespeare used his works to speak truth to power. We need to continue in that vein to speak truth to power. As someone who frequents Broadway, I often see dignitaries, I often see politicians that show up in shows. And for instance, when Mike Pence attended Hamilton, and Brandon took that moment to address something that was of importance to him and of importance to the cast, that was a powerful moment. It wasn't necessarily received the way that it should have because of one's own insecurities and personal biases, but he took that moment. And so not only just having that as something that happens post-show, but having that within the show, things that really challenge the viewers, things that really bring in those people who are powerful and really engages them and really gets them to think and critically about the power that they have and how they can use it in order to change.
Wow, it's really good. Donatella.
My big aspiration is to see how theater can help to dismantle the structures of white supremacist, hetero cis patriarchy. But if we can do mild reforms, I guess I really appreciate when theater can be affirming for other minoritized people instead of erasing, which is so often the case, or stereotyping, which is too often the case. And I think, building on what Hugh was saying, there can be dialogue, there can be challenging of people's presumptions, perhaps, and that those thoughts, that emotional journey you go on as an audience member, to resonate with what Professor Bianchini was saying, developing that empathy that can possibly lead to action, particularly for people who have the power to make those decisions. But it would also be great, again, to get back to Jorge's point, if we could change who gets to be those decision makers.
Yeah, I 100% believe that a friend of mine just posted this week. She said, "Don't just invite me to the table and point at the food. Invite me to," no, she said, "Don't invite me to the table so that I can serve the food and then eat afterwards. Invite me to the table so that I can eat with you and we can break bread together and learn from each other." And that was, when I read it first thing in the morning, it was very powerful that sometimes we're let in the room, but we're not necessarily let at the table to sit down and have those conversations and be a part of and be a decision maker or be a mover or a shaker. We're always seems to be on the periphery. And yeah, there is that moment where we do need to make that adjustment, and people need to make that adjustment to allow us and marginalized communities at the table and be a part of it. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to expand on what you were saying, Ricky and Donatella. I'm thinking a lot about issues of access, right? And so there's not just within Broadway, but in the entire professional theater ecosystem, right? There's labor practices that really uphold what Donatella mentioned, right? The white patriarchy, the white cisgendered heterosexual patriarchy. And this happens with access, right? In terms of not just who is being brought into the table, but things like, are the internships paid or unpaid, right? The 6-day-a-week rehearsal schedule, the 10 out of 12, and the sort of these labor practices that reinforce white supremacy and patriarchy. And last summer, there was a document that I'm sure a lot of people watching have heard about called "We See You, White American Theater." It was authored collectively by more than 300 BIPOC theater artists, and it looks at all kinds of ways to make American theater actively anti-racist. And one of these, I think, is this important piece of this conversation is about access. Hans just put the document. It's a 31-page document, list of demands. Different theaters are starting to respond to them. I'm here in Baltimore. I know that Center Stage has been sort of out in front in terms of acknowledging and responding to a number of the demands that are made in that document. And as we get to our post-pandemic lives, which we are slowly moving towards, I think I'm really watching to see how professional theaters all over the country will be not just going back to the status quo, but really trying to build something new.
A big part of that, though, Nadka, if I could interlude here, is that a lot of theaters, I think, are going to be afraid of that change because they have their subscriber base, and their subscriber base has largely tended towards one racial group, and so changing things too drastically can affect their business model. So, can they break through that? Right? I mean, we have a chicken or the egg problem here. We need an audience that is diverse, but there needs to be the performances, the shows have to be diverse in order to bring a diverse audience. Mm-hmm. And so which one happens first? That's really, I think, a big challenge. But the theater has to change itself before it can start. It has to start reflecting really society. At large. There's so many practices that theaters have done over the years that some theaters are really trying to break down. Baltimore Center Stage is making all of their fees for their different stages the same. rather than have the big stage, you get make a lot of money, and the little stage, you make less money. But what ends up happening is that the BIPOC stories tend to end up in the smaller stages because the audiences for that are a little bit smaller. And so all the BIPOC artists are making a much lower rate than everybody else. So there's so many things like that that leaders could be doing to really to move the needle in the right direction.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, and brings us to another question. And I have another one that's in my head. It's not fully formed yet. I'm working on it. What should students, now let me rephrase. What do you think a teacher or a thespian might do or can do to make change in social justice within the theater realm? What are some things that a teacher or a thespian could do?
I just wanted to respond to what Jorge was saying, right? Because I agree about the fear, especially fear is normal around change, and then you add the economic anxiety of a business staying profitable. And so what I think is so cool about theater educators at the college and the high school and the middle school level is that in many cases, you don't have the same commercial economic pressure, right? Like the performances are happening for the school community, and so they don't have to make X number of dollars to stay in business for the next year. So I think schools are actually the ideal place for new work and different stories, right? Because you don't have to do the Music Man, to call out one of the revivals that's opening when Broadway reopens later this year, right? You don't need to do that in order to be financially viable. So I think one thing that I would encourage students and teachers is to push to do new work and new plays. I think new plays are where the most exciting energy is right now in terms of American theater. And Hans is giving us some resources in the chat. I'll let other people jump in.
Just as Nadka said, my whole model was to never charge admission. Number one, it brings down the cost of royalties. And number two, I don't have to worry about breaking even. I don't have to worry about making profit. I don't have to worry about having to appeal to a certain base. First of all, I'm bringing theater to a community that has not really experienced theater, so it doesn't matter if I use a big name. They haven't seen it, so I can do anything. And to answer Ricky's question, what can a thespian or an educator do within the context of their school? Look around at who's not represented within your department and create a plan to engage those members of your school community. And maybe if your school community tends to be somewhat monolithic, think about how you can partner with other school communities so that you can create that dialogue, maybe with other students that that you or your class or your students would not have been able to have a dialogue with otherwise.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that, Hugh, because in the chats that I have been doing over the past year, that's one of the main things that I always say, because people always come in the chats and they go, well, where can I find, this talent? Like, we want to do Hairspray, but we don't have, the people of color. My first question is, why are you doing Hairspray if you don't have the demographic? But that's neither here nor there. But I'm like, have you engaged? Like, do you go outside of the walls of your theater? Do you know what your community looks like? Do you know people in your community? And, though I'm speaking from a community theater level, I think a lot of theaters forget the word community. And that can kind of go to, even schools. You're so focused on what is there that you forget that once you walk outside those walls, there are other people that you don't know. And I've even challenged some people. I'm like, ask your mailman, talk to your mailman, talk to the person that does your yard, talk to, the grocery person. And because I always tell them, everyone that I have found via theater has not been inside the theater. It's been, I'm out to dinner. I found somebody at karaoke, and then I found somebody in the grocery store. The cashier was just singing. I was like, oh, you do theater. And it's just being able to step outside our own comfort zone to interact with others that we don't know, and those opportunities to really just go outside of the walls, I guess you could say, whether they're internal walls that you think or actually physical walls. Go to the shop class, and even if you get the shop class to build your set, I have seen the interest urge on. They were like, oh, I can do that. Well, then come try it. I was like, well, I don't dance. I'm not asking you to dance. I'm just asking you to step touch. That's not dancing. That's you getting out of the way. Then next thing you know, they're doing lifts with somebody over on the side. So there are ways to entice youth and people that aren't familiar with our theater world and pull them in. It involves a little bit of trickery, but it happens. That's how we bait and catch. So anyone else on this topic? It's one I could talk about forever.
So I'm on the faculty of Boston University, and when we're interviewing candidates for our program, I like to ask them, how did you get into theater? How did you get into design and all those things? And the answer is very frequently, it was, oh, a friend of mine was in a show, and so they said, come with me. And the other answer we get are, well, the theater teacher really sort of got me really excited about doing it. And that's really the number one job, I think, of any high school theater teacher, is just to get kids excited about theater and the possibilities. I would advocate that, in order for greater representation in the theater, the stories that are put on stage have to be a little more diverse. It isn't just about, finding BIPOC kids to put them into Guys and Dolls. It's really, they need to see their stories too. And that is hard to program. I understand everybody wants to come see the big, Legally Blonde or everything, things like that. But a lot of those stories are not written for us. And so it's challenging. But really, I admire the high school theater teachers who are just, they're making it happen every time. They're sort of our first line. They can't get to us if they don't. They can't get to us if they don't go through the high school teachers. So, in order for us to help the American theater,
and we're going to wait for him to show back up, because he's right. In order for them to get to the college level and the professional level, the high school teachers, the middle school teachers, they really have to engage everyone on multiple different levels in order to get them interested and excited. Because I have noticed that people that get interested and excited in theater stay interested and excited. Because I got pulled into it literally. My friend didn't have time to take me home after dinner, so I went with her to an audition, and then next thing you know, I'm now 100 shows under my belt, and that was just off of going out to brunch. So I think it can happen. Donatella, did you have anything on this particular topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to add just how important school educators and directors are in teaching and staging these feminist, anti-racist plays by white women, non-binary artists, and people of color in order to center marginalized voices and to explain your pedagogical approach to your students. Because, for instance, I remember in school being taught plays like A Raisin in the Sun, and I felt like this was not relevant to my life. And it was only much later I realized I have internalized so much systemic anti-Blackness. And now I realize, like, this is one of the greatest plays of all time. And I've now written scholarship on the musical version of that play. And so I think when you explain to your students, like, this is why we're learning about these plays, then the students understand that, because otherwise they've internalized all this other nonsense and violence, from other biases in their lives. And then I wanted to add, if you are going to do Legally Blonde, if you're going to do these other traditionally white shows, you can cast students of color and just make sure that they're not all in minor roles. And I'm thinking, for instance, my university, before I got here, we did spend a lot and we cast an Afro-Latino man to play King Arthur. And that was such a huge deal for him to play a king. And he's gone on to get his MFA in acting. But we also had an Asian American man who played Patsy, his servant. And he said, I'm used to being like the second fiddle or like the friend. So we just have to be aware of how these different like histories and tropes might influence our casting, but how we can also use casting as a way to challenge those tropes and empower our students.
Yeah, Hugh, you sound like you have a add-on to that.
I do. Don't ask a student to check his or her identity at the door, or leave it in the dressing room. Just because Conrad Birdie is played as an Elvis type doesn't mean that you can't play him as a Jackie Wilson type. And imagine how that changes the dynamic of that show by having an African American star stay with this lily white family. It's in there, and I know it is because I did it. So don't be afraid to don't ignore the fact that this student is BIPOC. You can use it within the context of the script, as long as you are not having them appropriate in any kind of way.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, because I consistently do that with, and again, I wasn't planning on doing it, but I've done August Osage and just lucked up casting, and it ended up being all interracial couples, which completely changed the dynamics of those relationships. And I told all of them, I said, bring your history into the room. I am never one to, like you said, have them check their identity or anything at the door. I'm like, I want all of you not only in the room, but I want all of you in the role, so that there's meat to it, there's you to it. I never have, from a director standpoint, had my performers, like you said, Hugh, appropriate the character, because that's how it was seen when I saw it on Broadway, or that's how it was seen in the movie. I have them create that character based on the context of the show, but within whatever they bring to that story. And I did the same thing with The Wiz, and I'm still getting flack for that, because my Wiz was biracially cast, BIPOC people everywhere. And they were like, but your Wiz was white. And I was like, yeah, the only thing he couldn't say was "come here, boy." I just took that out. It was like that phrase wasn't going to happen. And he agreed. But we all sat down as a cast and had multiple conversations about what, in doing the show with a varied cast, how we were going to respond to that, because we knew the audience was going to have questions. So we always had talkbacks after the show to discuss, were we breaking something? Were we fixing something? Why did we do it? And it turned out to be really good for the community as a whole. So we had all those wonderful conversations. So I agree, there's so much in just changing the paradigm of how a lot of the shows that we want to do, change the paradigm of how it's done, and challenge yourself, challenge the actors, and challenge your audience. Um, Education, as my mom used to say, education doesn't come easy. You have to challenge yourself and push through it. And I think with theater, we really need to challenge ourselves and push through it. Any other statements before I go to the next question? All right, so And this one is a little bit kind of off, not off topic, but a little bit out there. What should students be reading so that they are exposed to age appropriate works representing our diverse culture? Yeah. All right, Hugh. I was like, you giggled.
One thing that this is a very difficult question, but taking from my own experience growing up in Longwood, Florida, where I was part of a small minority of African Americans in my community. When I asked what material I could do, my teacher said, find it. And she taught me how to go through and look for different scripts, different playwrights. She taught me how to do that research. She taught me how to go through those anthologies that get published and see, you know, is there someone you relate to? Look for their other work. And it's so much easier now with the internet. I had to do this at Borders. So the answer to that is teach our students how to be resourceful, how to do that research for themselves, because it'll serve them in the long run than constantly spoon feeding them. Here, why don't you read Fences? Here, read A Raisin in the Sun. Read M. Butterfly. If you don't know, then make that a project that's something that you do with your students, where you go and you do that research with them, because it's gonna serve them in every capacity, whether they go into theater or not, whether they go into law or into education. They're going to need to learn how to do that kind of research.
And yes, before everyone jumps in, I'm just gonna put out there for anyone that is listening, if you have a question, feel free to put them into the Q&A and they will get funneled up to us or in the chat, and we will be glad to answer those. But going back to the question at hand, I'm going to go Jorge.
As echoing what Hugh just said, and in the age of the internet, it is so, I feel like it's so much easier than when we started to find those diverse voices now more than ever. I can tell you that at least for Latinx playwrights, you can visit the Playwrights 50 Playwrights Project. And essentially it's introducing it to all of the amazing Latinx artists that are creating plays for the theater, most of which you won't know. There is, I think it's easy for us to reach for the August Wilson, and it's easy to reach for Maria Irene Fornes, or, you know, all of those that everybody knows, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so I would really suggest visiting sites like that. Donatella, of course, put up for us the alternative canon, which maybe we can get a link to that again. I've been seeing that list sort of kicking about the internet for a little bit now, and it's amazing. It's plays and playwrights from all over the world. So if you're looking for diverse voices, that is also an incredible place to start. You know, it is a challenge to find the right play. For myself in my classes, I can tell you that I spend a lot of time reading new plays, trying to find something that is pedagogically right for our students. I can't just do any play, even though I teach it's at the college level. And so I'm doing the research myself all the time and trying to find new plays to add to my list. But at the end of the day, once I have a list, I step back and I look at it, and I have to look at it through the lens of diversity. I look at it through the lens of diversity of gender orientation, of male, female playwrights. All of those lenses go into the consideration bin for my reading list, and that's incredibly important.
We do have quite a few questions that are coming in, and the 50 Playwrights Project and the Alternative Canon are in the chat. So here's a really good question from Dan. What is the number one thing a teacher who works in a school with no, and he did emphasize no, no racial diversity can do to promote social justice?
I appreciate this question. I work at a predominantly white institution. There's not no diversity, but it is predominantly, as I said, white. And certainly you're not going to want to stage productions that are written for BIPOC actors if you can't cast them with or BIPOC characters if you can't cast them, but you can still read them, right? You can still read them, you can still talk to them. And I feel, particularly as a white person, so much of the work that needs to happen in terms of anti-racism has to do with white people, like talking about and examining white supremacy and white privilege. And so I think I don't know what the racial demographics are of where you work, but if you or if other people listening are in a place where you are at a predominantly white institution, I think that's even more reason to talk about structural and systemic racism and to read diverse voices, even if they're not things that you're going to be staging. And then take students to go see productions, right? So the only sort of thing in that constellation is that you wouldn't stage a play, that you couldn't cast, but you can still read, discuss, expose students, go see productions as well.
And we have another question. Let me see. What is the one character that you've played? So Hugh, this is coming to you. What is the one character that you played or encountered in a production that you really felt connected to or represented by? And actually, that's going to go to Hugh and Donatella.
So for me, it would be Headley from Seven Guitars by August Wilson. That is, I was connected to him before I even realized that he was Caribbean. Just his story of his struggle against oppression and against racism, the issues that he had with his own father, and how all of those things came together in this fit of rage that consumed him eventually. It not only was I able to relate to it, but I was able to work through a lot of things for myself because of that character.
And Donatella?
I'm not an actor, but I'm a frequent theater goer. And I'd say recently, it was really the first time. So I'm obsessed with this new musical called Soft Power by David Henry Hwang and Janine Tesori. And what's really stunning is that almost the whole cast is Asian American, and almost all of them are playing white Americans, but it's supposed to be this like Chinese propaganda musical in the future after the collapse of the United States post 2016 election. And it's so satirical and hilarious. And so this main character of Shui Xing, of seeing Conrad Ricamora playing a leading Asian Chinese man, I like weirdly connected with him in a way that I never had as a Chinese American person watching theater, that he had these salient critiques, he could be the protagonist, and he was so funny and so righteous. And that just made me feel so wonderful and so centered in a way I just hadn't experienced before. So I went back and I saw it 4 times.
All right. What's the name of the musical again? Someone's asking in the chat.
Soft Power. I will put some YouTube links in.
Okay, thank you. And then, let's see, Jorge, can you answer that one?
Yes, absolutely. I work on a lot of plays, and so some of them connect with me a lot more than others. I think for me, Marisol is still one of the projects that I have felt the most connected to. It is a Latinx story, written by Jose Rivera, but the feeling of it is really incredibly universal. And during the pandemic, I thought of that play more than once, where Marisol really experiences as if the world is sort of crumbling around her. I think it's a beautiful play. It's a challenging play, I think, for high school to do. It's not an easy one. But that's a great one. Right as the pandemic shut down, I was about to go to Pittsburgh to work on a new play by Isaac Gomez called Per Cup. And it was so timely in terms of what it was trying to say. And in some ways, it kind of anticipated all of the unfortunate racial tension that that we've experienced so much in this country, but especially recently in the past year, where a Latinx man just goes to a coffee shop just to get coffee and experiences some pretty serious event of racism. So I hope a play like that finds a voice in the world. It's a new play and it's under development still, but an incredible playwright. And one to watch, and who just joined the Playwrights Ensemble at Victory Gardens Theater, by the way. It was announced today. They have 4 playwrights that are going to be part of a playwriting ensemble, and that's really exciting.
All right. Hugh's answering that question, so I will ask the next one. And I actually like this one. So, can you talk a bit about a fear that we are moving to a place where only minority artists can do minority plays for minority audiences, thus segregating the art form, which seems, oh, wait a minute, hold on, pull it back on my big screen, antithetical to the practice of the art form. I read it correctly. For me, I don't think we're moving in that direction.
I would just say, I think that question sort of reinforces a scarcity mindset, that there won't be enough room, right? And so we will be shutting out some stories and only favoring others. And for me, I think it's like, we're just growing a bigger tent, right? And we're allowing all of these voices to be heard instead of hearing the same ones over and over.
Yeah, and I also think it kind of goes back to what Hugh was saying, with, Bye Bye Birdie. It's not segmenting, or as I have said, it's not tokenizing each of the different communities to only do shows that fit within their communities. It's about looking at the cross references that you can do, the cross casting, the educational components of just discussing shows that don't speak to your background. I love discussing, Chekhov shows, and I love discussing August Wilson shows, and I remember when someone took me to see Miss Saigon, I was like, I'm not even sure what this is about, and next thing you know, I'm like deep in the rabbit hole of Google on Miss Saigon. I mean, just, it's opening up that lens of dialogue. We spend a lot of time so narrowly focused on, we're not saying it has to be a minority play. We're just saying it's been so open for everyone but minorities that now instead of narrowing that search, what we're trying to do is, as it's out here, we're just trying to open it up, like Nadka was saying, wider. So I guess I'm just trying to say, take the pinpoint out of it and just broaden the horizons. This theater is a feast. Everyone should be able to eat from here and here and here and here versus having your own little TV tray of theater. And we have 2 minutes remaining. Ooh, what can we do about plays like Thoroughly Maud and Millie, who have racially stereotypical characters?
Donatella should answer this one.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not even sure we have time, but Donatella, you can take that last question and take us out.
So first, I know that the authors have been thinking about revising it, and I've been doing work on thinking about how do you revise musicals that have Orientalist representation and marginalized Chinese characters, like in Anything Goes as well. So there are artists who are trying to work on that. I'll say, I think to some extent it's because they've become more aware of anti-Asian systemic racism as real. But some of it is also because they want to make more money so that they can license the show more frequently because of more people being aware of anti-Asian racism and opposing it. And so they want to make the show more palatable. So you can work on things to give more agency to those characters, for instance. You can take out the yellow face aspect from the show. Is that really necessary? You can take out the weird white slavery thing that's associated with Chinese people. You could cast the show more diversely. There was an idea of casting an Asian American woman to be Millie, perhaps, at the City Center Encore's production that closed because of COVID. But the other thing is, like, maybe you just shouldn't do that show and you should do other ones that are like about Asian Americans instead and redistribute those opportunities and those roles and those stories that way.
All right. So
can I jump in, Ricky? I'm sorry. I'll try to keep it short. Because I have very strong feelings about that. There are certain shows that where I think the racism is baked in, and that is just how it is. And I think at the high school level, it's hard to take a show like Thoroughly Modern Millie and fix it, so to speak. So that's I think that's a show that is a hard one. Another one, for example, that many people don't think about, West Side Story. West Side Story is incredibly offensive towards Puerto Ricans. And so even Steven Spielberg, that's coming out with the movie, did a panel talk in Puerto Rico, and the audience basically started to argue with him. Why are you doing this show? Because it is offensive towards us. So I just think it's important for us to even shows that have been around for a long time and have been, you have to re-examine them. You have to re-examine them and really read them and think about that. Just making out such slight casting choices is not good enough for many shows.
So with that, any closing statements as we end this segment? I thank everyone for their questions. I thank this wonderful panel. I will be tapping each and every one of you for different things coming up. But with that, any closing statements to our listeners? Nadka?
I think just don't be afraid of messy, right? Like keep doing the work, and even if you feel uncertain or concerned or fearful, like the only way out is through. So stay pushing on those levers of power.
Donatella?
Yeah, building on that. First, thank you so much for coming. This can be uncomfortable work. It's hard work, but it is necessary work. And we need all of you in this if we're going to make an equitable and just a better world for us and for our students.
Hugh?
If it's not challenging, it's not worthwhile. So if you don't feel like you are experiencing new challenges, new pushback, if it's not difficult, if the conversations are not difficult, then you're doing something wrong. And so you have to find ways in order to get into those uncomfortable spaces so that change can take place.
And Jorge?
Don't forget that theater is fun. It should be fun. And that's the whole point of doing theater at the high school level. And so even a challenging play can have an element of fun to it, and don't forget that. But we do need to sort of step back for a moment and re-examine how we've done business as usual in the past, and see how we can move it in a direction where more people can feel completely included and part of the world.
Yeah, and my parting words is that for me, and I always say it, change starts with one conversation, and continues with continued exploration, and not be afraid to stir the pot, be the troublemaker, make good trouble, as John Lewis said. I wear that t-shirt proudly. I am consistently making trouble, and I will consistently make trouble, and good trouble, for theater moving forward socially, respectfully, and responsibly. So with that, everyone, thank you so much.
Ricky, Nadka, Donatella, Hugh, and Jorge, thank you so much for bringing this conversation directly to Thespian Nation for our students and for our educators. For all of you in the audience tonight, please share this recording with your peers, share this recording with your friends, share this with other theater makers. This is the conversation and the dialogue that we all need to be having together in order to truly make a difference.